All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's structured conversation behind the scenes using Excel to visualize data with Rebecca Goldstein, Associate Director for Assessment and Research in Student Affairs at Florida Atlantic University. My name is Mary Lee Demer, and I will serve as your moderator today. On behalf of the SAAL Professional Development Committee, I thank you for participating in today's structured conversation. I also wish to thank Ms. Goldstein, Shelley Ann Pleasance, Margot Saltonstall, and their colleagues from Northern Arizona University for providing us with the technology for today's session. A few logistics before we get started. Please feel free to adjust the size of your chat window using the arrows to more closely monitor our conversation. I also encourage you to participate in today's conversation by offering questions, comments, either through the chat window or by using your mic. If you'd like to, you can insert emoticons into the chat window using the little smiley face icon just below your name in the participants window. If you need to leave the room, the little icon with the timer next to that will indicate to others that you've stepped away. The little hand icon next to that will be raising your hand, and of course if you raise your hand, and I'll unmute your mic. And we'll have definitely one poll today. So if you see the icon with the check mark, that's how we'll respond to today's poll when it comes up. That's okay. The voting lines are long, I'm hearing from Liz. Welcome. I'm glad you made it. All right, so let's get on with that. While we're primarily using the chat window for questions and comments, like I said, please feel free to use your microphone. So without further ado, let's get started with today's structured conversation. After the work of developing the right question, finding the right methodology, gathering the data, and analyzing it, one might think that the hard part is over. But the last step, the visualization, is just ready to begin. With the power of Microsoft Excel, this structural conversation will look at how to visualize both static and ongoing data collection. Particular attention will be paid how to create a dashboard and analyze data from different angles. So at this time, if you don't have your Excel sheet open, I invite you to open it so you're ready to go when Rebecca starts walking us through. In the meantime, our learning outcomes for today is we hope that you will explore the advantages as well as disadvantages of different types of visualizations. We'll use Microsoft Excel to create a simple dashboard as well as discuss the appropriate uses of dashboards. So our presenter today is Rebecca Goldstein. She currently serves as Associate Director for Assessment and Research in the Division of Student Affairs at Florida Atlantic University. In this position, she works with the entire division, but particularly with housing and residence life, to create systems and procedures to collect and understand the work done by student affairs professionals. Previously, Rebecca worked at the University of South Carolina as the assessment coordinator in university housing, where she developed a dashboard system for 18 residence halls. Rebecca is a graduate of the MED Higher Education Student Affairs program at the University of South Carolina and holds a BS in Environmental Science from Indiana University. So with that, I thank you again for joining us for today's conversation, and I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca, and welcome.
Thanks, Marilyn, for introducing me, and to all of SAAL for inviting me to lead this conversation. This is something I'm really interested in and passionate about, of taking that data that everyone's already collected and sharing it out and figuring out ways to do it that are effective and helpful, and just not letting it sit around. So when Marilyn originally approached me with this topic, I kind of started going all the way back to research, and I went to the Harvard Business Review, because the Harvard Business Review was where I found what the elements of good visuals are. And Harvard Business Review sets up 3 different elements. There's another one that's 7 elements, but the truth is all of the 7 ones fit into the 3, and 3 is a lot easier to keep track of. So a good visual understands the audience. And what they were talking about when I'm going to mess with his name, Speckleather, I believe is how you pronounce it. When Speckleather wrote this, he talked about a good visual is something the audience understands. So knowing your audience, who is going to be looking at the visuals, who's going to be the recipient of them, is it something that is going to be helpful for them? Is it going to make sense to them? So knowing who your audience is, what their skill level is, how comfortable they are with data, etc. It sets up a clear framework. So what SpikeLetter was talking about here is looking at visuals that make sense. For example, using a pie chart only when you're looking at percentages. Using a bar graph only when you're looking at discrete items compared to each other. And looking at a line graph, and only using that if there is something in between the lines. So looking specifically with line graphs, being careful that if you show a line graph, there really is a trend, or you're trying to demonstrate the absence of a trend, and being careful of what each type of graph means. If you use a visual of people, for example, a count of people, make sure you're talking about people rather than puppies. Things like that is the biggest thing. And then the last is that the graph itself tells a story. So the graph should, in and of itself, without you being there to explain it, explain what the data means. This means it should be labeled correctly. It should have percentages. It should have numbers that make sense. Things like that. So to give an example, I used some data that I had on hand, which was the college breakdown of different students at our university, and I put it into Excel and I let it come up. So this is what I got. This is Microsoft Office's default graph. So we ask you, is this a good graph? Thumbs up or thumbs down? And this is our first poll, our only poll.
Yes, you can go ahead and use the check mark. I have it set up for yes and no. Yes would be a thumbs up and no would be a thumbs down.
Yeah.
Give a
Let
couple
go
more
and
minutes.
But they just gave me the emoticon of a thumbs down. Yeah. For those of you who are saying this is a terrible graph, I'm with you. It's clear. You can see all the different sections of it. It's something you can easily follow, but it's hard to read the text on it. The colors are really nicely differentiated, which is helpful, but it's really hard to follow it, especially like this red area in here. Becomes really hard for anyone to follow. Same with the dark blue under the red. It's something that most people couldn't take care of. Yeah. Thanks, Marilyn. Those would be really hard for people to follow along with. So the next one, is this one. So I made a couple of quick changes on it. So kind of looking at this one again, here at least the colors are better. So you see changing it to white makes things pop. Making it bold makes things pop. There's still a lot of information though. So Harvard Business Review found that the human can only hold about 4 to 5 different things within a pie chart. After that, your brain starts to lose track of all the different things within it. So given that, I said, well, what if I just want to concentrate on one college and really show that section? So I did that with the College of Business. Now, it's true, it's harder to see the other ones. But I want to talk to the College of Business. I want to say, hey, our college represents 23% of our population compared to everyone else. I also chose less generic colors. These are colors, as you can see, of FAU, with the shades of blue representing the ocean, and the red, which I have no idea what it represents, but we use the red a lot. But this starts to move into something that has a little bit of a clearer storyline to it. It starts to be clear what I want to concentrate on because I've highlighted it in a different color. It starts to be clear where I'm going with this. because I've really shown where it's going. You can still go back and see all the different other little colleges and their percentages, but it's really easier for someone to follow along that what we're talking about is the College of Business, which is our biggest college. But even if I were to pull out, for example, the Little Honors College, that could be a really good place to start showing this is such a small sliver of our university. It's only 1%. And I could make that story just by switching the red here over to the blue up there. So the way you design your graphs really changes the story that you're going to tell. And it really changes how people perceive it. So then just some general guidelines about graphs. As I said, be careful of the number of sections on that pie chart. And with a pie chart, you want to make sure that what is happening is a summative area, so that each percentage means something. And I'll give an example of this. Going back here, each student could only be in one college, and it's their primary bachelor's major. But we know that there are students who are double majors in the College of Arts and Letters and the College of Science. So when I run a report like this, I have to be careful that adds up to 100%, that students aren't being double counted. Because if the 50 students here are also here, that does change my percentages. And that's one of those things that you see it happen, and you just want to be careful. A check all that apply question in a survey is another good example of this. It may be that 70% of people agreed with the statement, but in the total overall, that was only 20%. And that math can get fuzzy really quickly. When you have a line graph, we're going to draw a little bit. Line graph. And it looks like this. The human eye assumes that something is happening here. Even though this might not be a point on the graph, your body and your mind assume that this is a trend. So if this is not a trend, if this point doesn't exist, it really stands then that you want to make these bars because they're discrete points. And I hope my drawing is okay and it's not messing anyone up too much. But that way, when you have those bars, you're really showing this is discrete, something different is happening. Something important is different here. The next one is that colors matter. So I try to choose university colors because those tend to be important. But sometimes you want to do things of red, yellow, green. People will always assume that the red is bad. Unless you're actually at a red university, people tend to assume that red is bad. So when I worked at a university whose rival was orange, anything in orange was assumed to be a terrible thing. So I would put the negative results sometimes in orange because that's what people associate those colors with. If you want to show things that are maybe in the same order every time, that's where you can use rainbow. So we are looking at quintiles, and we put people in by quintiles by rainbow so that we could watch how people go around, how people lined up, and how those quintiles changed over time. And finally, the last thing that Harvard Business Review, and I would say, is remove excess lines and colors. So as we go through making graphs today, I'll show a little bit more of what that means. But you want to take away anything that could be distracting for your viewer, because you always assume your viewer is very easily distracted by you. And that they're trying to look at this quickly and gain all that they can from this. So the main thing when Marilee and I discussed this session that we realized could be helpful is rather than talking about all of this, to instead really show it and do it a little bit more interactively. So what I'm going to do is be sharing an Excel document with you. If you don't have it or don't have access to it, just type it in the chat room and Marilee will email it to you as well as we keep going through this. But feel free to follow along with me. If you get lost, please let me know. I'm happy to go back and continue explaining where we were. But I think going through this with the Excel data is really the best way to show what these skills can do. So without any further ado, I'm going to switch over to Excel. Sure. We can see Excel, right? Okay.
I can see it. Is anyone having a problem? I think everybody should be okay, right? I'll just, these folks. Yeah, everybody looks good. I'm not seeing anybody with problems. Cool.
Okay. Wanted to make sure. So what we have is a fake data set I concocted. I mentioned I worked generally with Res Life, so I started with a resident list of 3 different residence halls. And you'll see Cooper Hall, Verasky Tower, and Lenawala Poly Quad. And like Big Bang Theory, you're going to notice this throughout this. So then we get to an attendance list. So here you see date and event number, a unique identifier that was assigned to each event, the name of the event, and the student ID number who attended the event. This could be from a sign-in sheet. This could be from a card swipe data set. There could be a couple of different ways you could have collected this data. But we have about first 2 or 3 weeks of school's data here. And then an event list. So you see the date the event occurred. You see that event number again. You see the event's name, the sponsoring organization, so who put up the money for it, and then which divisional priority it came under. So starting here, you see that student ID number, the student name, their gender, the class, the college that they're in, residence hall, their t-shirt size, their distance from their permanent address, and then whether or not they're considered in and out of state. And these are just some example fields that you might have on hand of demographics, of attendance, and then the event. So the first thing with this that we wanted to look at was creating a pretty simple graph. And to do that, we're going to just look at t-shirt size very, very quickly. Because if you've ever ordered t-shirts, t-shirt size is a pain to order. It really is. So if we've got t-shirt size, we could do count ifs on this to find out all the t-shirt sizes, or we could do a pivot chart, a pivot table. And a pivot table will start summarizing this very quickly for us. So in the upper corner, you're going to highlight all of your data. The reason you want to highlight all is it's going to allow you to add more data as needed. So you're always going to want to highlight all of your data. And you want to make sure before you do a pivot table of any kind that every column has a header. Otherwise it gets mad at you very quickly. So you're going to go under Insert, Pivot Table. It's already selected the table and range, and we're just going to let it do it in the new worksheet. Is it okay? And it shows up here. So a pivot table allows you to aggregate data very quickly. So under rows, we're going to drag t-shirt size, and then we're going to drag t-shirt size under values as well. And it populates this for us. As I said, this just is a very quick aggregation of data to see what you've got. So just looking at this straight up, we can see large and medium is the primary, some small, some large. Okay? So pivot tables are great at aggregating data. We can also go a little farther. For example, if I wanted to know, okay, this is great, but I'm going to need to deliver these shirts to each residence hall, I can add that to columns. So now I can see in total for Cooper Hall, I'm going to have 33 shirts, 11 large, 9 medium, 7 small, 6 extra large. And this is just a very quick way to aggregate my data so that I can see what I'm going to need. So from here, I know what I'm going to need to do. And I can clean this up so it's a little bit more presentable. So under the design side, I can change colors on this. I can get rid of all the extra lines. I kind of like the lines on this. Clicking in here, design, adding in back that blue because we're a blue school. Don't love where it says column labels, for example. Don't really like that. So instead I'm just going to put a space, get rid of the word row labels. Not so interested in that. I really don't like this blank tab. So I'm going to get rid of it. Under report, under blank rows, remove blank lines. Under, gonna mess some of this up. Show in tabular form, that's a little bit nicer for me. Always forget the blank. Can get rid of my grand totals for both of them. Can get them on for everything. When in doubt, actually, I just hide this and it goes away. And I'm totally known to do that so it prints nicer. Anything like that, just so this looks nicer so I can print it out. Maybe I don't want count of t-shirt size. And this would might print nicer. I look at this and I'm like, you know, I really want this all centered. And I can center it. I can bold all of this. Maybe I want to change the font and make it a little bigger. Anything like that can be done with a pivot table. So all of those prettifying things, very easy to do. The one thing that's hard to do with a pivot table is it's not always so easy to change the order in which these come. In order to do that, you actually have to go back into your original data. Sometimes this will work. Sometimes it won't. We'll see. And we can sort our data. No, it won't work here because it doesn't go in the right order. That's annoying. Cut, insert, attendance, and refresh. And now it starts to move into a nicer order. But that's about all you can do to get it in the order you want, unless you really play with it. But those are pivot tables. They are the easiest way to aggregate data. However, sometimes what you really want to do is you want to summarize data so that you can see averages. So for example, we can also create a pivot table of being able to look at the average distance people came from home. So we can take distance from permanent address and bring it in as the value. Then we can take maybe their class. So now I can see that I can see the count over here. If I want to change that so it's the average distance someone came from their home. So I go under value field settings. I go over to average. I hit OK, and it tells me that. So I can see that on average, anyone in the university came about 375 miles from home. But I can see that that number is much higher for sophomores and seniors than it is for graduates, juniors, and freshmen. So now let's say I'm really more interested in how that compares in-state, out-of-state. I can split that by columns. So now I can see that the freshmen who came from out-of-state came about 754 miles. But the graduate student who came from out-of-state came from about 1,266 miles. And this can really help you make some quick comparative statistics. and just really aggregate your data very quickly. This can be really helpful, but sometimes you do just need that visualization. So once you have your data into a pivot table, you can also move it into a pivot chart. So let's do that really quickly now. This little button pivot chart will insert a pivot chart on your table. As you see, it pulls it up just like any other chart you would make in Excel. And I can insert it. We'll make it much bigger. Tap Shift forward. And you can start to see this is the same data you had earlier, but now it's shown visually. What's hard here is it's a little funky looking. So this is where, as the Harvard Business Review said, we're going to start prettifying the graph. So two main things. These field buttons are very helpful for you, and they allow you to do things, but you probably don't need them. So we're going to hide all field buttons. This blank section, which was so annoying me earlier, we're going to hide it by going back up to class and removing blanks. At that point, it will shift the data. Removing these excess lines, they're not that useful. We're going to get rid of them. We're also going to get rid of the axis. And the reason we're going to get rid of the axis is we're going to add data labels. These data labels are in small font and have 1,000,000 zeros. We're going to change that. Well, we just feel to change that. I love when things work differently. Yes, I'm sorry. To remove the blank space, you go back up here, and on the little filter button, you remove blank. So it's here, and then you get rid of it, and it removes itself. And please feel free to ask questions as we go through. Oh, is it still sharing?
Yeah, it's still sharing.
Okay.
And no problem, Tom. And anyone who has a question, I'm keeping an eye on the chat window. So I'll let Rebecca know in case she doesn't see it.
No. Sorry, it looks very strange on my screen right now. Okay. So going back to adding data labels. I don't know why I changed them. Normally you can just go here to number and change them. Right now my computer disagrees about that. But we'll add them to both data sets. Oh, here we go. You change them in the pivot table itself and remove zeros until they're at the level you want. So for miles, I'd rather have them here. And I'm going to refresh the graph. And it's not going to work. I don't know why. I wish I did.
Yeah, Rebecca, I think it's frozen on our screens because it's not just me, and I'm seeing a couple other people. There we go.
Better?
Yeah, it looks like it's not. Everybody who was saying that it's frozen, is it okay now? Because it's not frozen for me anymore. All right, cool.
Okay. Sorry about that.
All right.
So what I'm trying to do is normally you can change the labels. For some reason, I'm having trouble doing that. Usually you change them in the pivot chart itself and remove the zeros. Thank you. And it normally will add data labels that are normal amounts of zeros. I'm not sure why it's not doing it right now. But it is not in the mood to. So we'll just keep going. We can also go under here and change the size. Oh, it really does not want to do this. Here we go. So we can make them bigger so that someone could actually read them. And for each data set, you do have, I know, Murphy's Law of Technology. For each data set, you do have to raise them independently. But you can also change the colors on this so that they're a little bit more appropriate. You'll notice that I'm continuing to use our school colors because that's something that's useful for us. And our in-state, out-of-state legend. I like it. I don't particularly like it there. I want it up here. So changing the font size of each of those. You'll notice that these are in gray, not black. So I'll change them to black. Anything like that to make it easier. The last thing that people sometimes forget about when they're doing these charts is to remove the background. The background makes it move a little bit easier just throughout. So if you want to bring it into Word, into a PowerPoint, you usually want to remove your background. So I'll say no fill. Fill, no fill. And that'll just make it a neutral fill so that I can move it without an issue somewhere else. Last thing I just noticed, I want to change these data labels and make them a little bigger. One thing that's always a bit of an issue is where the data labels turn into 45-degree angles. It's always something. So you can change this. You can never change it back to flat if it's decided that it's going to go 45 degrees. You just have to keep expanding it. But you can, if you really do need it that small, you can change your axis here and change your text direction so that it's at least vertical straight down, which does take up less room generally. Let's say you've decided midway through this that you really don't want to use a bar graph, you want it to go the other way. You can easily do that. You're going to go under Design, change Chart Type, and let's say you want to move to a bar graph. You can easily change that. So now you need to come back to your axis and change it back to horizontal. So anything that you can normally do with a graph, you can with a pivot chart. The nicest thing about a pivot chart is as you update the data from the resident list, it would also update here, allowing you some really good insight of being able to change your data as your data changes. So for example, as we go throughout the year, there are students who leave housing. This allows me month to month to change our graphs to reflect our current occupancy rate rather than what our initial one was. So with pivot charts and pivot tables, we're getting ready to move on. One thing just to know with pivot charts and pivot tables, you can only do them on pie graphs, bar graphs, line graphs, but not XY graphs or anything like that. So an XY chart cannot be done as a pivot chart, which is rather frustrating at times, because sometimes that's what you really would want. So you can't adjust a trend line by a pivot chart, but it is still quite useful. So we're going to insert a new pivot chart very quickly, highlighting this graph again, the data again, inserting pivot table in a new sheet, and we're going to do it as a pivot. We're going to bring in class, and let's do class here away for the moment. Make it into a quick pivot chart. Add our data label. Here we go. We're going to get rid of total. We're going to label this academic classification. So now we have, and we're going to get rid of our blank, because we always don't want a blank. So now we have a pretty good chart to start off with. But now let's say we want to be able to show the different residence halls. We could make 3 different charts, and that would be fine. We could do what we did before and show them as 3 different residence halls like that, and that works well too. Or we could insert residence hall as a slicer. And slicers are great and wonderful and very powerful. So we're going to insert one very quickly. Under Insert, you'll see Slicer under Filters. And I'm going to insert Residence Hall as a slicer. So now I can look, and the graph will rearrange to show Cooper Hall, Paraski Hall, and Lenawala Poly Plaza. And you'll see the graph will just shift around. So I could print these very quickly. I can do slicers by a lot of different things. I can do them by time. I can do them by month. I can do them by student or college to really look at it. So let's say I wanted to add a college slicer to this.
Rebecca, can you go over the slicer one more time before you move on?
Yeah.
Please.
So let's say I want to add a second slicer. So I'd go under Insert, Slicer. And it has all of my different ones in here. So I'm going to add in a male-female slicer. And it just adds it straight to the graph. So I can look at the females in the residence halls versus males. I can also look at these at the same time. So I can click on, I'm at females only, and I can look at females only in Cooper Hall. So I can see that there are 8 female freshmen in Cooper Hall. Now I want to know about Lena Poly Quad, and I can see there are 7 female freshmen there. So the slices can interact really nicely with each other, which allows you to visualize the data while you're creating it at the same time. So that's a really nice element with the slicers that is quite helpful at times. I don't have an example of it, but I do want to just show where it is. Not there. I can insert a timeline slicer with this one. And a timeline slicer would allow me to look at an event by date. So we're going to try it by inserting, oh wait, we should have enough. I'm going to insert a pivot table here with my event list data. I'm going to build a very quick table. The sponsoring organization very, very quickly. But now I'm going to insert a slicer by timeline. And it allows me to look at a specific period of time. There was nothing in April, so it allows me to look at just August. The timeline is really useful to look at a specific period of time. You can break it up by years, by quarters, by days. So if I wanted to look specifically what events happened on August 30th, on August 8th, I can see 2 different events happen. And it's really helpful to be able to look back. The one thing it doesn't do well is weeks. Weeks are really important, and they are what we use mostly in student affairs because this was built on business model. Months become what they generally look at. So there's a timeline slicer that becomes very helpful in the long run, and another way to organize your data.
Rebecca, Pam mentioned while the timeline is useful, so I just want to check in and see if she's okay or if she'd like you to go over that again.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, I did put a link about, just really quick from Microsoft Office on using slicers.
Yeah.
Just to get a quick resource in there. And I also, there's lots of freezing, so I think that's why there's, I think when things are freezing up for folks, they're falling behind.
Got it.
I also included, okay, sorry about that, Pam. I also included a link to information about creating a timeline. So it does kind of go into what the advantage of that is. Just really quick stuff looking up for everybody.
And one thing I can send to Marilee afterwards is a YouTube video that looks at this a little bit more closely.
Yeah.
I don't have it loaded up with me, but I can send it to her so you can follow along with it too.
Yes, I'll include that resource with the recording and everything after our session, so I'll make sure that folks can see that.
The last thing,
Thanks,
and I do realize we're running low on time, so I want to demonstrate it, but I know there might not be enough time for people to follow along with it, is really this creation of a dashboard. And I did want to make sure we got a chance for you to see it, if not to follow along, so bear with me a little bit. But our last part is the Power Pivot part. So if under Options, you can go to Add-ins, and you go under COM Add-ins, Go, and you see the add-ins that are available. You see all of mine are checked, but if your Power Pivot for Excel is not checked, that would be the part that you would need to add. So you would go under Power Pivot. It would show up in your ribbon. You go, and actually I need a new document. You can't do this in the same document, which is slightly annoying. But do I want to save? Sure, why not? I'm going to go under Power Pivot, Manage. Manage is going to allow me to get the data. I'll go under Get External Data from other sources, which I'll choose an Excel data file. Browse. I pull up the data for this conversation. I'm going to use the first row's column headers, and I'm going to pull in the data we've been using. The reason to do this is to start bringing together data that are in different sheets. So for example, I really want to be able to look at what residents are attending which divisional priority. And this is going to allow me to do that. So as you can probably see, there's two things here, but this looks very similar to what we had before. It's just now in the Power Pivot Manager, which is also called an OLAP cube sometimes. So we're going to insert a pivot table from here in a new worksheet. And you can see I can choose fields from anything. I'm going to go back to Manage for a second. I also am going to relate some of these fields. If you've used Access, this is going to look very similar. So I'm going to relate, for example, from the resident list the student ID to the attendance list of the student ID. And then I'm also going to relate the event number in the event list to the attendance list. And you can see now these are related fields, and Excel can now pull from one list into another list. And this has great implications for us. So, for example, I can now pull by resident list, and I'm going to pull their student ID number, and I'm going to pull from attendance list the event name, and I want to know who attended these events, and I can see it. So I can see this person attended 2 events. So right now it's summarizing this for us. I don't want that. I'll change my value setting to count. And now I can really see how many events each person is attending. This can be incredibly helpful for us. I can also now, as we said before, add a slicer to this. Same as before. Go under Inserts, Slicers, and now maybe I want to know by divisional priority. So I can see, did the student attend a collaboration event? And I can see that. So I can see many less students attended a collaboration event, engagement event. Innovation was the most common one. Things like that. That is the power of Power Pivots. It really allows you to relate data that you might not have seen that could be related to each other. I know I moved through that very quickly, so I did want to make sure you had some idea of what this was all building up to. So with that, I'm going to return to the slides for a second. Yes. Okay. So, I missed this one. Oh. So the last part is really looking at when do visualizations work. And when they work is when data is moving continuously and that you understand it and it makes sense as a graph. The nice thing with pivot tables, power pivots, anything like that is you can add data to those systems and it will automatically update your graphs. And it moves very quickly and easily. People like visualizations. And I feel like I should have started this with that. People enjoy seeing data in graphs. With power pivots with slicers, it's fun to touch the buttons and see the graphs move. That's something that anyone really gets into. And the first time they start with playing with pivot tables and power pivots, it's, can I touch that button? Can I touch that slicer? And see their graph move. And it awakens for many people, even people who don't normally like data. It really awakens in them this desire to discover. And as assessment people, that's innate to us. There's something many of us have in common is why we're in the field. We want to discover and uncover the data. But visualizing data in this way when it's intuitive and when it's kinesthetic, it gives people something else that they want to play with. Even though they can't tangibly touch it, they can almost tangibly touch it, and that's good enough. Data like this also makes, visualizations also really make your data feel more connected to people. They can see the patterns and make their own inferences with you as the guide. But it allows people to see their own inferences as they go. And that's really why I'm very interested in this area and where I'm kind of going with it. But I hope these skills have given you even an introduction into what can be done. If nothing else, I would say play with the pivot tables and the pivot charts. Those are some of the easiest parts of Excel that are really underutilized. The Power Pivots is the next level, and it's fantastic. We didn't touch on it, but Excel has something called Power Maps. It allows you to look at heat maps I don't know if it can go as well as a campus level yet, but it's something I've been looking into of could we map how our data looks differently across campus. But you can definitely do it in admissions or in enrollment management across the nation and by county across the state. Visualizations are definitely an area that many other industries have gone, and I very much foresee higher ed going in there that way. And with that, I want to thank you for joining me for the last hour or so, and that's about all I got for you. So thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Before we close today's session, I just wanted to check in and see if anyone had any burning questions or comments they wanted to share before we end for today. All right. Well, Whitney has awesome presentation, and I agree. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for showing us how you use pivot tables and dashboards in Excel and just showing us what you do. I'm really excited that you were able to join us today and share your knowledge with us. So I also want to thank all of our participants for joining us today. Resources, the YouTube video Rebecca referred to, we'll look up some resources and get some links out for you along with the recording. So we'll follow up with that in the next couple of days. And keep an eye out on the listserv over the next week, week and a half or so. Our next structured conversation will occur on Tuesday, December 6th at 12 p.m. Eastern, when we'll be talking about assessing student affairs, student learning outcomes with regards to accreditation. And we have a few folks from the different accrediting bodies who are going to join us in a 90-minute panel discussion. So mark your calendars for that. Thanks again for joining us for today. Have a great day. Please don't forget to go out there and vote. And we'll see you next month. Have a great day. Thanks, Rebecca.
Bye.